The familiar embrace of pipe tobacco and aged leather typically brought a serene calm to Nicholas Winton's small London flat. Tonight, however, the hearth's gentle warmth and the grandfather clock's steady tick-tock did little to quiet the restless energy thrumming beneath his skin. His polished mahogany desk was a tableau of imminent escape, meticulously highlighted maps of the Swiss Alps, glossy pamphlets promising pristine slopes, and a detailed train timetable, all conspiring towards a glorious ski holiday just weeks away. Every detail was meticulously planned, from the invigorating mountain air to the perfect arc of a downhill run. It was a well-deserved respite, a chance to clear his head after months spent navigating the labyrinthine world of the stock market. He traced a finger along a jagged peak, visualizing the biting wind and the satisfying crunch of fresh powder under his skis. A subtle smile touched his lips, a rare, private indulgence. Nicky, as his friends knew him, rarely lingered on personal pleasures. His mind, ever sharp and analytical, swiftly pivoted from recreation to logistics, already mentally itemizing his departure preparations. His worn leather suitcase, a silent harbinger of adventure, waited patiently in the corner. The telephone's shrill, insistent ring shattered the room's quietude, jolting him from his reverie. With practiced economy, he lifted the receiver. "Winton," he stated, his voice calm and clear. On the other end, the line crackled with a distant urgency, a voice both familiar and strained. "Nicky, it's Martin. I hope I haven't caught you at a bad time." Nicky's brow furrowed. Martin Blake, a trusted friend and fellow stockbroker, had recently relocated to Prague for a business venture. He sounded troubled. "Martin, no, not at all. What's wrong?" A heavy sigh spanned the miles. "It's complicated. Look, I know about your ski trip and I truly hate to ask, but would you possibly consider coming to Prague instead? Things are escalating rapidly here, and not in a good way. It's far more serious than I anticipated." Nicky's gaze drifted from the ski maps to the window, where the last vestiges of a grey London evening clung to the sky. The promise of the Alps receded, replaced by an unsettling premonition. He pictured Martin, usually so self-assured, now sounding utterly on edge. "Serious how?" Nicky pressed, his tone measured, though a prickle of concern began to spread through him. "It's the refugees, Nicky. The Sudetenland crisis, it's worse than the papers are reporting. The Germans are pushing, and the border areas are in utter chaos. Thousands are displaced, living in makeshift camps. I've tried to help, but it's a mere drop in the ocean. I need a clear head, someone organized, someone who can actually cut through the bureaucracy. I need your help, old friend." Martin's voice was a low plea, a rare fissure in his usual composure. Nicky listened, piecing together each fragmented sentence. The details were sparse, yet the gravity of Martin's tone painted a vivid, disturbing picture. His ski trip, once a beacon of delightful anticipation, now seemed trivial, almost shameful. A quiet, undeniable pull asserted itself within him. Not an obligation, but a profound, almost instinctual urge to respond to a cry for help. It was a call that resonated deeply with his innate sense of duty, and his quiet, unwavering determination to do what was right. He closed his eyes for a moment, the image of pristine slopes dissolving into the stark reality of Martin's words. When he opened them, the decision was already made, clear and resolute. "When would you need me?" he asked, mentally discarding the ski brochures and reaching for his well-worn atlas, flipping to the page for Central Europe. "I'll cancel the Alps. Give me a day or two to sort things here, I'll come to Prague." A palpable sense of relief resonated in Martin's voice. "Thank you, Nicky, you won't regret it. I truly believe this is important." Nicky simply hummed in acknowledgement, his mind already racing, not towards the thrills of a ski descent, but towards an unknown, unexpected journey, the true scope of which he could not yet begin to fathom. He hung up the phone, a new map spread before him, the city of Prague now the solitary, compelling destination. The quiet resolve on his face was absolute, a city in shadow. The train's whistle shrieked, a mournful cry swallowed by the cacophony of Prague's Wilson station. Nicholas Winton, his sensible tweed coat already feeling too warm in the bustling concourse, stepped onto the platform. The air, thick with the smell of coal smoke and damp earth, hummed with an undercurrent of anxiety. It wasn't the usual cheerful bustle of a continental city. A palpable tension clung to the hurried goodbyes and whispered conversations. Nicky, ever observant, noticed it immediately. Families stood in tight knots, their shoulders almost touching, heads bent low. Mothers clutched their children's hands with an intensity that spoke of more than just affection. Fathers, their faces etched with worry lines, scanned the crowds, their eyes darting, never quite settling. He saw a young woman discreetly wipe a tear from her cheek, her husband's arm a protective barrier around her. This wasn't the holiday spirit he'd envisioned when he'd first decided to cut short his skiing trip. This was fear. He navigated the throng, his small suitcase bumping against legs. Everywhere, the narrative was the same. Hushed voices, concerned glances, the almost imperceptible tremor in a parent's hand as they smoothed a child's hair. Nicky's initial plan to simply observe the situation, to gather information for a friend, hardened into a conviction. This was more urgent than he'd anticipated. The shadow cast by the recent annexation of the Sudetenland felt like a physical presence, chilling the very air. Across the crowded hall, 8-year-old Ilara Novak gripped her mother's skirt, her small hand clammy. Her father, Jan, spoke in low tones to another man, his voice a low rumble Ilara couldn't quite decipher. But she understood the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set. They're saying things are getting worse. She heard her mother Anna whisper to a relative, her voice barely audible above the general din. The borders, the children. Ilara didn't fully grasp the words, but the fear in her mother's eyes was clear. She felt it too, a knot in her stomach that tightened every time a soldier, their uniform crisp and imposing, walked past. She pulled a stubby pencil and a crumpled piece of paper from her coat pocket. On it, she began to draw 3 stick figures holding hands, beneath a bright, defiant sun, her mother, her father, and herself. She made sure their smiles were wide, their eyes sparkling, as if drawing them that way could somehow magic away the worry that clung to her parents like a shroud. Nicky finally reached the edge of the concourse, finding a momentary lull in the human tide. He leaned against a cold stone pillar, watching. The quiet desperation of these families was a stark contrast to the lively, boisterous scenes he was accustomed to in London. He saw Ilara, her brow furrowed in concentration as she drew, her small, earnest face a beacon of innocence in a world rapidly losing its own. He felt a surge of resolve. He hadn't come all this way to simply witness. He had come to act. The city indeed was in shadow, but perhaps, he thought, a flicker of light could still be ignited. A big idea takes root. The crisp autumn air of Prague carried a different chill for Nicholas Winton than for the ordinary tourist. It was the chill of fear, a palpable dread that clung to the cobblestones and echoed in the hushed conversations of adults. He walked past the bustling market, the aromas of roasted chestnuts and mulled wine doing little to warm the knot forming in his stomach. Children, their faces a mixture of innocence and burgeoning anxiety, played in the squares, their games often interrupted by a parent's nervous glance or a whispered instruction to stay close. Nicky saw them, truly saw them, not just as part of the scenery, but as vulnerable souls caught in a tightening vice. He'd come to Prague on a holiday, a brief respite from his London stockbroking life. But the holiday had dissolved into an urgent awakening. His friend Martin Blake, working with the British Committee for Refugees from Czechoslovakia, had opened his eyes to the escalating crisis, the annexation of the Sudetenland, the ever-present threat of German invasion. These were not distant headlines but a grim reality pressing in on families. The memory of a small girl, no older than 8, clutching a tattered doll as her mother wept silently nearby, seared itself into his mind. Something must be done, he thought, the phrase hardening into a conviction. The thought solidified into a plan, audacious and seemingly impossible: get these children out. To England. It was a wild, desperate idea, yet it felt like the only path forward. He wouldn't be able to save everyone, but he could try for some. He pictured the logistical nightmare: visas, transport, foster families. The scale of it was daunting, but the image of those frightened children fueled a quiet determination. Within days, Nicky had transformed a small, borrowed room in an apartment building into his makeshift headquarters. It was cramped, lit by a single bare bulb, and furnished with a rickety table and a few mismatched chairs. Maps of Europe were tacked haphazardly to the walls, alongside scribbled notes and lists. The air hummed with a frantic energy, a silent testament to the urgency of his mission. He'd scrounged up a typewriter and a stack of blank forms, ready to record the details of every child he could secure a place for. His meticulous nature, usually applied to financial ledgers, now found a higher calling. Word spread quickly through the anxious Jewish community, a whisper of hope in the gathering darkness. Families desperate and clutching their children's hands began to arrive. One cold afternoon, a young couple, their faces etched with worry, brought their daughter, Ilara. She was 8, her dark hair tied back with a simple ribbon, her eyes wide with a confusion that belied her age. She carried a drawing, a vibrant, if slightly wobbly depiction of her family holding hands, a bright sun beaming down on them. It was a defiant splash of color against the encroaching gray. Her parents explained, their voices hushed, how Ilara was a bright girl, how she loved to read, how they just wanted her to be safe. Nicky nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at the drawing. He picked up his pen, dipped it in the ink, and carefully wrote Ilara Novak's name on the first line of a fresh page. The London Labyrinth. The clatter of the train pulling into Liverpool Street Station was a familiar, if somewhat overwhelming, sound. Nicky stepped onto the platform, the cool London air a stark contrast to the urgency burning within him. He clutched his worn briefcase, not with the usual papers of a stockbroker, but with the fragile hopes of hundreds of children. The sheer scale of the task ahead, now that he was back in the familiar sprawl of London, felt immense. He had to find families, secure permissions, and somehow, miraculously, fund it all. His first port of call was his small flat, where a stack of urgent letters already awaited him. He barely noticed the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. Instead, he spread out maps of Czechoslovakia, lists of names, and the few photographs he possessed, transforming his tidy living room into a makeshift command center. The silence of the flat was punctuated only by the scratch of his pen as he drafted advertisements. Families needed for refugee children, they would read, from Czechoslovakia. Urgent. He knew it was a long shot, but he had to try everything. Days blurred into a relentless cycle of phone calls and frantic letter writing. He cornered every acquaintance, every colleague, every distant relative who would listen. "Do you know anyone who might take a child?" he'd ask, his voice firm but laced with a quiet desperation. "Just for a little while, until things settle." Some offered sympathy, others expressed their concerns about the looming war, but a precious few offered tangible help, a spare room, a distant aunt, a friend of a friend. Each small lead was meticulously noted, each potential home a flicker of hope in the gathering gloom. The real challenge, however, lay with the government. Navigating the labyrinthine corridors of officialdom felt like an endless journey. He needed special entry permits, waivers, and guarantees. He spent hours in stuffy waiting rooms, explaining the urgency of the situation to weary civil servants who, while sympathetic, were bound by regulations. "These children are in imminent danger," he'd reiterate, his voice steady, despite the frustration mounting within him. He filled out forms until his hand cramped, each signature a small victory, each stamp a confirmation that one more life might be saved. Evenings found him hunched over his desk, the glow of a single lamp illuminating the stacks of paperwork. The smell of ink and old paper filled the air. He tallied numbers, estimated costs, and then re-estimated them, trying to stretch every shilling. The train tickets alone were a colossal expense, and his own savings, once substantial, were rapidly dwindling. He wrote to charities, to philanthropic organizations, to anyone who might consider donating. Every rejection was a blow, every small contribution, a surge of renewed determination. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked relentlessly, a constant reminder of the precious time he was losing, of the children waiting. He would not stop, not until every single one of them was safe. The London night outside was quiet, but within his small flat, the quiet man worked on, a silent sentinel against the rising tide of war. The first whisper of hope. The Prague air hung heavy, thick with coal smoke, and a penetrating chill that seemed to leach into the very marrow of his bones. Nicholas Winton, his tweed coat drawn tight against the late afternoon breeze, felt a persistent tremor in his hands that the fabric couldn't subdue. Before him, the steam engine, a colossal black iron beast, sighed and groaned, a living entity straining at its constraints. Carriages, freshly burnished, were crammed with small, anxious faces pressed against the glass, the vanguard of his desperate endeavor. He had offered each child a reassuring smile as they boarded, a gesture that felt impossibly weighty on his own lips. Now the conductor's whistle shrieked, a high, piercing cry that cleaved through the station's din. A knot tightened in Nicky's stomach. The wheels beneath the train began to grind, a slow, agonizing rotation that promised departure but seemed reluctant to fulfill it. With a final lurch, the long line of carriages commenced its forward creep, a steel serpent uncoiling from the platform. Nicky raised a hand, waving once more, a silent valediction to hundreds of children, each a universe of nascent hopes and unvoiced fears. His gaze swept over the windows, striving to fix every face, every small waving hand, into his memory. Would they find safety? Would they truly reach England's shores, a sanctuary from the encroaching tempest? He had moved mountains, navigated a bureaucratic maze, and wrestled against a tide of despair, all for this singular moment. Yet, as the train gathered a sluggish momentum, dissolving into the hazy Prague skyline, a part of him remained breathless, suspended between profound relief and an insistent, gnawing worry. Further down the platform, amidst the dwindling crowd, Ilara Novak clutched her mother's hand, her father's arm, a comforting presence around her shoulders. Though not on this transport, she had witnessed it, a long, silver dream snaking its way out of the station. She had observed the kind English gentleman, Mr. Winton, speaking to the families, his voice calm despite the urgency in his eyes. He had touched her crayon drawing of her family, a simple sketch, and promised her turn would come. Her mother, Lenka, squeezed her hand. "They're going, Ilara. They're truly going." A fragile hope, long absent, softened her voice. Joseph, her father, nodded, his gaze riveted on the train's vanishing tail. "He keeps his word," he murmured, more to himself than to them. "Mr. Winton, he genuinely does." Ilara looked up at her parents, then back at the now empty tracks. The station's clamor gradually returned, but it felt altered, imbued with a new, quiet determination. She envisioned the children on the train, hurtling towards a new country, a new existence. She didn't know what England looked like, but Mr. Winton had painted a picture of green fields and security. And she still held her drawing, a quiet testament to the family that would, one day soon, follow the path forged by this first, brave exodus. Hope, a delicate seedling, had finally taken root, racing against the dark. The scent of damp wool and anxious humanity thickened the air in Nicky's small office. It was no longer just a few hopeful faces. The room overflowed, a tide of desperate parents and wide-eyed children, their belongings bundled into worn suitcases and cloth bags. The first train, a miracle of logistics and sheer will, had given birth to a surge of belief, a fragile, potent thing that now filled every corner of his cramped space. Nicky, sleeves rolled high, moved with a controlled frenzy, his usually neat desk buried under manifests, telegraph forms, and hastily scribbled notes. He spoke in a low, calming voice to a woman clutching a wailing infant, then turned to a father whose eyes, red-rimmed and hollow, pleaded for reassurance. "Yes, Mr. Richter, your twins are on the next list. We're confirming the foster family in Kent now. The paperwork should be ready by morning." His pen scratched furiously, crossing off names, adding new ones, a constant, dizzying dance of ink on paper. The telephone rang incessantly, a shrill counterpoint to the murmuring conversations and soft sobs. Nicky answered each call, his voice betraying no hint of his own exhaustion, only a focused determination. He was arranging more trains, finding more foster homes, negotiating with officials, and always checking lists, his mind a labyrinth of names, dates and destinations. In London, the families receiving the children were a different kind of challenge. Nicky spent his nights on the phone, explaining, cajoling, painting a picture of the quiet courage of these young refugees. He slept in fits and starts on a worn armchair, the taste of stale coffee a constant companion. Every moment was a race, not just against the clock, but against a creeping dread that permeated the very air. Miles away in Prague, Ilara Novak sat at a scrubbed wooden table, her small fingers clutching a stubby pencil. The silence in her family's apartment was heavy, punctuated only by the crackle of the radio. Her parents sat close, their faces drawn, their whispered words punctuated by the increasingly grim news reports. The borders were tightening. The broadcasts spoke of unyielding lines of soldiers, of a darkness spreading like an oil stain across the map. "The danger is very near, Ilara," her mother had said earlier, her voice thin. "We need to be ready, my little star." Ilara didn't fully grasp the words, but the fear in her mother's eyes was unmistakable. She drew a picture, A bright sunny field with a tiny girl holding a bouquet of impossibly large flowers, a small house with smoke curling from its chimney, and a family with wide, smiling faces. It was a picture of safe, happy places, a silent prayer for a future she hoped, with a child's fierce optimism, still existed. She knew her name was on a list, somewhere. She clung to that thought, a tiny seed of hope in a world growing increasingly bleak. Nikki felt the tightening grip of that same bleakness. The news from Germany grew worse with each passing hour, the reports from the BBC painting a stark picture of escalating aggression. He knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that his window of opportunity was closing. He could hear the footsteps of the bad men approaching, a rhythmic, terrifying beat against the dwindling sands of time. He had to work faster, had to save more, had to be stronger than the encroaching night. The train that never left. The scent of stale tobacco and the rhythmic clatter of the typewriter were Nikki's companions in the small, cluttered office. Maps sprawled across the desk, crisscrossed with red and blue lines, marking routes and potential safe havens. This was it. The biggest undertaking yet. Hundreds of children, more than all the previous transports combined, were slated for this final, colossal train. He meticulously checked the manifests, each name a small, hopeful flicker. Every detail from the exact departure time to the number of blankets on board had been painstakingly arranged. A knot of urgency tightened in his stomach. The air in Europe felt heavy, crackling with an unspoken threat. He felt it in the hurried whispers, the fearful glances, the way people clutched their children tighter. This train had to leave. There was no other option. September 1st dawned grey and oppressive. Nikki had been up for hours, the adrenaline a bitter taste in his mouth. He was just about to leave for the station when the radio, usually a source of cheerful morning tunes, crackled with a grave announcement. Poland invaded. War declared. The words hit him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. No. Not now. Not today. A cold dread seeped into his bones, chilling him to the core. He immediately called the station master, his voice tight, with a fear he refused to acknowledge. The news was confirmed. Borders sealed. All rail traffic to Britain suspended indefinitely. The journey to the station was a blur of frantic hope and dawning despair. He pushed through the empty ticket hall, the silence deafening. Beyond the archway, on track 12, the massive steam locomotive sat, a hulking monument to a dream. Its polished brass gleamed dully under the overcast sky. Its carriages stretched back, an endless line of empty seats, each one meant for a small, frightened child. The platform was deserted. No excited chatter, no tearful goodbyes, no frantic mothers pressing last kisses onto their children's cheeks. Just the vast, silent train, ready to go nowhere. Nikki walked slowly along the length of the silent carriages, his hand tracing the cold metal. He pictured the faces, the solemn boy with the spectacles, the little girl clutching a worn rag doll, the twins who had finally learned to smile. They were still there, in Prague, in homes that were no longer safe, waiting for a train that would never arrive. The enormity of it pressed down on him, a crushing weight. He had moved mountains, navigated bureaucracy, charmed officials, and begged for resources, all for this moment, and now, it was all for naught. The war had arrived, a brutal, unyielding fist, smashing his final desperate plan to pieces. He stood there for a long time, the only sound, the distant rumble of the city, his shoulders slumped, his heart a heavy, aching stone in his chest, a secret, locked away. The rumble of the train faded, leaving a silence in its wake that felt heavier than the London fog. Nikki returned to his desk at the stock exchange. The familiar tick-tock of the clock, a constant reminder of time's relentless march. He bought and sold shares, discussed market trends, and sipped lukewarm tea, yet a quiet ache settled deep within him. The faces of the children, their wide, hopeful eyes, the faint scent of their unwashed clothes, these sensations lingered, ghost-like, behind every transaction. He saw them in the flash of a headline, the fleeting glimpse of a small hand gripping an adult's. Life resumed its predictable rhythm, but for Nikki, the world was now tinged with a quiet sadness, a knowledge of vulnerability he couldn't unlearn. One evening after the office closed and the city lights began to shimmer, Nikki carried a worn leather suitcase up to his attic. The air was thick with the scent of dust and aged paper. He knelt on the rough floorboards, the single bare bulb casting long wavering shadows. From a sturdy cardboard box, he carefully extracted the precious cargo, The meticulously typed lists of names, each line a life saved, the sepia-toned photographs, children's smiles frozen in time, the hand-drawn maps of the escape routes, and the countless letters, some crumpled, some pristine, detailing the desperate pleas and joyous reunions. He smoothed each document, his fingers tracing the faint creases, remembering the urgency, the sheer exhilarating terror of those months. One by one he laid them flat inside the suitcase, arranging them with the precision of a cartographer mapping uncharted territory. The click of the latches echoed in the stillness, a final definitive sound. He tucked the suitcase away in a dark corner, beneath a stack of old blankets, a secret locked away, not just from the world, but from himself. Decades later, the attic was even dustier, the blankets more threadbare. Great, Nicky's wife, a woman with a practical mind and a keen eye for organization, embarked on a long overdue clear-out. Her hands, now gnarled with age, rummaged through forgotten boxes and moth-eaten textiles. She uncovered the leather suitcase, its surface cracked and dry, the buckles tarnished. "What's this then?" she murmured, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. It was surprisingly heavy. With a grunt she wrestled it out into the dim light. The latches, stiff from disuse, eventually gave way with a groan. Greet gasped. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed tissue paper, were the lists. Hundreds of names, meticulously typed, each with a date and a destination. Beneath them stacks of photographs, small, earnest faces, some smiling, some solemn, all young. There were letters, official-looking documents with foreign stamps, and hand-drawn sketches of train routes. Greet picked up a photograph, a small girl with braids, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. A tremor ran through her. This wasn't just old paperwork, this was a history, an untold story. A profound sense of awe, followed by a surge of questions, washed over her. She looked towards the attic door, a new understanding dawning in her heart about the quiet man she had shared her life with, the children's embrace. The bright studio lights felt unusually warm, almost oppressive, as Nicholas Winton sat in the plush armchair. He adjusted his tie, a small, nervous gesture he hadn't realized he still made. The host, a woman with an effervescent smile and a voice that filled the room, was mid-sentence, her words a gentle hum in Nicky's ears. He wasn't sure why he was there, only that he'd been invited to discuss a historical curiosity. His meticulous ledgers, the ones detailing the children, remained locked away, a private testament to a time he rarely spoke of. He just wanted to fade into the background, as he always had. The host paused, a dramatic beat that stretched the silence. Then, her voice, now softer but still carrying, introduced a segment. "Tonight we have a very special guest, Nicholas Winton, a man whose quiet actions decades ago touched countless lives." Nicky shifted, feeling a prickle of discomfort under the sudden, focused gaze of the audience. He saw the first row, a mix of older faces and younger ones, all looking at him with an intensity he couldn't quite decipher. A woman, perhaps in her late 50s, with striking silver hair and eyes that held an ancient sorrow yet sparkled with a vibrant light, slowly rose from her seat in the third row. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for a microphone handed to her by a production assistant. Nicky frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. Who was she? Her voice, though soft, resonated with a profound emotion. "My name is Ilara Novak. When I was a little girl in Prague, my parents spoke in hushed tones of a man, a good man, who would help us." She paused, her gaze locking with Nicky's. A tear traced a path down her cheek. "I am one of Nicky's children." The air in the studio thickened, a collective gasp, rippling through the audience. Nicky's breath caught in his throat. "Ilara?" He remembered a small girl with wide, frightened eyes, clutching a worn wooden doll. Could it be? His mind, usually so sharp and organized, felt suddenly muddled, overwhelmed by the rush of memory. He looked at Ilara, truly looked, and saw the echoes of that child's hope in her tear-filled eyes. Then, another person stood, a man with a booming laugh and a kind face, followed by a woman with a gentle smile, and another, and another. The studio audience, once a passive observer, became a sea of rising figures. Grandfathers with stooped shoulders, grandmothers with their hair pulled back in neat buns, even younger adults, all standing, all looking at him with the same mixture of awe and profound gratitude. The host, her own eyes now glistening, stepped back, allowing the moment to unfold. The room filled with a symphony of whispered thank yous, choked sobs, and a wave of raw emotion that washed over Nicky. They surged towards him, a gentle tide of humanity, their hands outstretched, their faces etched with decades of untold stories. He was enveloped by their embrace, a warmth he hadn't known he desperately craved. He felt a hand on his shoulder, then another, and he was no longer just Nicholas Winton, the quiet man, but Nicky, a hero to hundreds. Tears streamed down his own face, unbidden and unstoppable. He tried to speak, but his voice was thick with emotion. Finally, when a moment of relative calm settled, he managed a hoarse whisper. I just tried to help, that's all." He looked at their faces, at the love radiating from them, and in that moment, understood the true impact of his seemingly small actions. "Anyone can do a very big, kind thing," he added, his voice gaining strength. "Even just one person." He had merely opened a door, but they had walked through it, carrying the light of their lives forward, a testament to the enduring power of compassion.